Imagine this. If one day your mother and stepfather kicked you out of the house you'd lived in for 14 years to take your bedroom and give it to their unborn child, what would you do? That's precisely what happened to me. I thought that after my father died, my mother would love me more, but I was wrong. She was willing to throw me away for the sake of an unborn child and another man. Luckily for me, my grandmother showed up and saved me. She even used a wooden stick to teach them a lesson. But that wasn't all. 16 years later, I discovered a horrifying truth. My father's death wasn't just a simple accident. I found that out through the journal he left behind. Follow my story, and I'll tell you what happened in my life. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda, and I am 30 years old. I'm currently the sales director for a major real estate corporation in Chicago. This job requires me to travel a lot, meet clients, and negotiate million-dollar deals. But no matter how busy I get, I always try to be home before 7 p.m. I live with my grandmother Carol in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago. The home sits on a quiet street lined with red maple trees on both sides, a spacious front yard, and a small backyard garden where she takes great pride in her roses. My life right now is peaceful. I have a stable job with a 6-figure salary, a solid savings account, and most importantly, someone who waits for me to come home for dinner daily, my grandmother. Every evening when I open the door, the smell from the kitchen and the sound of her calling my name always warm my heart. She's 81 years old, her hair snow white, but her blue eyes still as bright as ever. Thankfully, her health is still good, though her joints ache a bit on cold days. She often cooks delicious meals, from simple garlic butter toast to elaborate stews, and always has valuable life advice for me. To me, she's my grandmother, my mother, and my best friend all at once. And every night before I drift off to sleep, I remind myself, no matter what happens, I will be there for her and take care of her because it's thanks to her that I have the life I have today. She's the one who took care of me when I was 14 after my mother and stepfather kicked me out of the house. My story begins on a weekend in October 2009. I was 14 years old, living with my mother, Rachel, my stepfather, Simon, and his daughter from a previous marriage, Harper. She was 12 back then. We lived together in a 3-bedroom house in the South Loop, a relatively quiet area with rows of red brick houses pressed close together. My mother was pregnant with their first child together, her belly round and full after 8 months. She often rested her hands on it and spoke to the unborn baby, her eyes glowing in a way I hadn't seen since my father passed away. That Saturday was crisp and chilly. We had just finished dinner. The air in the house felt more tense than usual, and I could sense something was wrong when I noticed Simon and my mother constantly exchanging glances. When we cleared the table, my mother asked the whole family to gather in the living room. Her voice trembled slightly, and I knew this wouldn't be an ordinary family meeting. Even though I didn't want to sit with them, I obediently followed. Harper curled up in her favorite armchair while Simon leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. My mother sat on the couch, rubbing her belly over and over as if looking for comfort. At that moment, I had no idea this would be the last dinner we would ever share as a family. Once everyone had settled in, the air in the room grew heavy. Simon locked eyes with me, his stare cold and familiar, then spoke words that cut like a knife. "Starting tomorrow, you're moving to the living room." His sentence hit me like a thunderclap. It felt as if time froze and every sound around me disappeared. Thinking I had misheard, I quickly asked, "What? You're not serious, are you? Why would I have to move to the living room?" Without hesitation or the slightest hint of remorse, Simon replied in a flat tone, "We need the room for the baby that's on the way. You understand?" The moment those words left his mouth, I went numb. This was the house my father had bought with all his heart, and the room I stayed in was the one he had personally designed and decorated for me when he was still alive. The blue walls, the oak bed he had assembled, the bookshelf filled with the stories we once read together. And now a stranger told me to leave behind all those sacred memories. Trying to stay calm, even though my heart was pounding like a drum, I looked Simon straight in the eye and said firmly, "I'm not moving anywhere. My father has a part in this house." The moment I finished, I saw Simon's face slowly turn red. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and the veins in his neck bulged visibly. His eyes were filled with hostility, and I was certain that if I had been over 18 at that moment, he wouldn't have hesitated to come at me. A few seconds passed in silence before Simon turned to my mother and said, "Talk to her. She doesn't respect me." Hearing that, my mother nodded wearily. Maybe she didn't want things to get any more heated. Struggling to stand because of her big belly, she slowly walked over and sat beside me. She took my hand in hers, looked at me with pleading eyes, and spoke softly. "Amanda, I know this is hard to accept, but could you sacrifice for your sibling? The baby's almost here, and it needs a room of its own." Her words felt like someone tightening a rope around my neck. My chest ached as if it were caving in. I searched her face for even a trace of the warmth I used to know, but all I found was distance. Finally, I replied coldly, "Why should I be the one to give up my room and not Harper? This is Dad's and your house, not Simon's and Harper's. They moved in here. They should know their place." The moment the words left my mouth, my mother suddenly shouted in a tone I had never heard from her before, "Stop it, Amanda!" It felt like I had just been slapped hard across the face. For the first time in my 14 years living in that house, my mother yelled at me, her only daughter, to defend two strangers in our lives. Her voice echoed through the living room, and I felt like my soul had shattered. The anger and hurt surged to the breaking point, but I was too shocked to argue. Instead, I stood stiffly, turned my back, and walked toward my room. Behind me, Simon shouted with fury, "You stubborn little brat! You're disrespecting us!" No matter how loud he yelled, I ignored him and kept walking without looking back. In that moment, I had the sinking feeling that my life was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. After everything that had just happened, I wanted to retreat into my room, lock the door, and hope this was all just a nightmare. But Simon wasn't about to let me do that. Just as I reached for my bedroom door, a large, rough hand clamped tightly around my wrist and yanked me back with brute force. The grip was so firm it sent a sharp pain shooting up my arm, and I instantly knew who it was. Simon. He stood before me, looking down with eyes full of hostility. His face was flushed with rage, his jaw clenched tight. In a voice thick with menace, he barked, "I'm your stepfather. I wasn't done talking. Who permitted you to walk off like that?" At that moment, my mother and Harper hurried over. Seeing Simon's aggression, my mother tried to keep her voice calm and said, "Simon, calm down. She's just a 14-year-old kid." Only then did Simon slowly loosen his grip on my wrist, but he still wouldn't let me into my room. Instead, he planted his large frame in front of the doorway, blocking it like an immovable wall. The air felt suffocating. My mother turned to me then, but the concern I had hoped to see in her eyes wasn't there. Only irritation and exhaustion. In a tone I had never heard from her before, she said, "Amanda, apologize to Simon. You disrespected him." In that moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No matter how clear the truth was, she was siding with him, demanding that I, her daughter, apologize to the man who had just tried to take my room and had hurt me. I looked down at my wrist, red and burning, already swelling from the force Simon had used. I couldn't hold back anymore. I shouted, "Simon's the one who should apologize to me. He hurt me. Look, Mom." I held my wrist up for her to see, the skin flushed and puffy. Deep down, I still hoped she would step closer, gently take my hand, check if I was severely hurt, and then turn to scold Simon. But instead, she just stood there staring at me with cold, distant eyes. A few seconds later, she said, "Stop making such a big deal out of it. Your hands is just a little swollen. It's nothing." Her words froze me where I stood. In that moment, a painful truth settled deep in my mind. My mother had changed entirely. She no longer loved or protected me the way she once did. While everyone was still standing there, locked in tense stares, Harper suddenly stepped forward. She glanced around at all of us, then spoke slowly, her voice sounding innocent. "Don't we have a storage shed out back? We could turn it into a bedroom for Amanda." When her words left her mouth, I saw my mother's and Simon's faces light up. They exchanged a knowing look, smiling in quiet satisfaction and nodding in agreement. It felt like this was the solution they had been waiting for all along. Simon, now much calmer, gently patted Harper's head before turning to me and saying in a falsely pleasant tone, "Harp's idea isn't bad at all. I'll hire someone to renovate the shed into a decent room. Once it's done, you'll hand over your bedroom." By then, I was exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally, but the anger from Simon hurting my wrist still burned in my chest. I realized I didn't need to respect or please any of them. Looking him dead in the eyes, I answered firmly, I'm not going anywhere. If you like that idea so much, turn the shed into a room for Harper or your baby when it's born. My refusal, without even a hint of compromise, sent Simon into another outburst. He shouted at me, "If you won't do what we're telling you, then get out of this house right now, you disrespectful little brat." His voice was loud and sharp, heavy with threat. The sound echoed through the house, startling Harper enough to make her step back. But strangely, I didn't feel afraid at all. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. I looked straight at him and replied without a trace of fear, "This house belonged to my dad. You have no right to kick me out." When I mentioned my late father, Simon laughed mockingly and contemptuously. He sneered at me and said, "Your dad's been dead for years, kid. The house is in your mom's name now. Don't try to throw your dad's name around to scare me." His crude words about my father froze me in place. I immediately turned to my mother, clinging to a small, desperate hope that she would speak up to defend my father's honor and mine. But the more I hoped, the deeper the disappointment cut. She said nothing to defend the man she once loved. She stood there looking at me with cold eyes and said firmly, "Simon's right. If you won't agree to give up your room, leave this house." Remembering the fundamental child protection laws I had learned at school, I forced myself to respond calmly. "I'm only 14. Legally, you can't kick me out." I finished no sooner than Simon let out a cruel, deliberate laugh. He slammed my bedroom door shut without giving me a chance to react. Then he pulled the key out of the lock and gripped it tightly. Looking at me with a cold, challenging glare, he said, "I'm not kicking you out anymore, but I'm not letting you into your room either. Go ahead, call the cops if you want. They won't be able to do a thing to me." With that final challenge, they all walked away to their bedroom, leaving me alone in the hallway, sitting in front of the door to the only place I had ever considered my refuge. I sank onto the cold floor, my back against the locked door, and began to feel with absolute clarity that my life would change in ways no one could have predicted. Sitting in front of my bedroom door, I fought hard to hide my tears. They kept threatening to spill over, but I refused to let them see me as weak. My head was full of questions. Why they could be so cruel to me, why I, a 14-year-old kid, had to endure such injustice in the very house where I was born and raised. But what hurt me the most was my mother's complete change in attitude. She had truly become someone else. In her heart, it seemed there was no longer a trace of my father, who had loved her for 15 years and built this house with her from the very first brick. In his place now stood Simon, along with Harper and the baby they were about to have. It was agonizing to realize that they, the ones who had entered my mother's life barely a year after my father passed away, were now receiving more of her love and care than I, her flesh and blood. While I was still lost in those painful thoughts, I suddenly remembered my grandmother, Carol, the woman who lived just 10 miles away and had often told me in a firm voice, "Whenever something happens, just call me. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Without hesitating for even a second, I rushed to the phone my mother had left charging on the living room table. My hands trembled from worry and fear as I carefully pressed each digit of her number. I had called her countless times before, so the sequence was etched clearly in my memory. After 3 long rings in the quiet night, Grandma picked up. Before she could even speak, I blurted out in a shaky voice, "Grandma, please come save me." I heard heavy footsteps thudding from the bedroom the moment the words left my mouth. Simon charged out like a raging animal and yanked the phone from my hand. He barked at me in a menacing tone. "What the hell are you doing? Who did you call?" Without giving me a chance to answer or explain, he pressed the phone to his ear and immediately recognized my grandmother's familiar voice on the other end. Suddenly, his tone shifted completely. In a voice so overly gentle it was almost laughable, he said, "There's nothing serious going on, Carol. Amanda's just fooling around. Don't worry about it." With that, he quickly ended the call and carried the phone into his bedroom, leaving me standing alone and helpless in the darkened living room. When he disappeared behind the bedroom door, I slowly sank into the couch, and after my failed attempt to reach Grandma, a crushing sense of hopelessness wrapped around me. I knew that for the long night ahead, I'd be sleeping on that sofa with no warm blanket, no soft pillow, and most importantly, no sense of safety in my home. In that moment, I felt like a homeless person in the very house my father had spent his life building. About 30 minutes later, as I sat huddled on the couch, lost in the baneful thoughts of everything that had just happened, the sharp, urgent sound of the gate buzzer suddenly rang out. It kept going over and over as if whoever was pressing it was in a rush and deeply worried. Hearing the relentless buzzing, Simon stepped out of the bedroom, looking irritated and annoyed. As he walked toward the door, he muttered under his breath in an exasperated tone, "Who's showing up at almost 10 o'clock at night? This is ridiculous." Curious, I got up from the sofa and followed him. And when I saw the familiar figure of my grandmother, Carol, standing outside the iron gate, it was like a surge of strength shot through me. When I looked at her, I couldn't hold back my emotions. I yelled with every ounce of strength I had, "Grandma, please save me!" Simon stood right at the gate, but made no move to let her in. Instead, he said in a sharp, dismissive tone, "Carol, it's 10 at night. We can't let you into the house at this hour." His unusual refusal only deepened her suspicion that something serious had happened to her granddaughter. As for me, I kept shouting for help, desperately hoping she'd find a way to get me out of this. A few of the neighboring houses started to light up from all the noise. Some people even stepped onto their porches to see what was happening. Not wanting the situation to escalate or draw the entire neighborhood's attention, Simon was forced to unlock the gate. I bolted out and threw my arms around my grandmother when it swung open. Being wrapped in her warm, safe embrace made me want to cry. And at the same time, I knew for sure now that she was here, she would protect me. After stepping inside, Grandma looked around the room and asked firmly, "What happened here?" Simon and my mother quickly exchanged glances before launching into a made-up story. Simon, speaking in his usual fake smooth tone, said, "It's nothing serious, Carol. Amanda just missed you, so she called you." But my grandmother Carol couldn't be fooled so easily. She'd lived long enough to know when someone was lying. She turned to Simon and my mother and said sharply, "Both of you be quiet. I want to hear it from Amanda." Then she turned to me, her eyes softening, and said, "Amanda, tell me everything that happened." Without hesitation, I told her the whole story in precise detail, from their demand that I give up my room to the moment Simon grabbed my wrist too hard, to his threats to throw me out of the house, and finally how they had locked me out of my bedroom. When I held out my wrist, still swollen and bruised from Simon's grip, Grandma looked at it and let out a weary sigh. "Oh my God, my poor girl, what have they done to you?" Grandma suddenly stood up while Simon and my mother sat in tense, worried silence. Without saying a word, she quietly walked outside toward her car. I had no idea what she was planning. A moment later, she returned, and a solid wooden stick was in her hand. Before anyone could react, she charged straight at Simon and began swinging at him. He managed to grab the stick with his hands just in time, but not before she landed several blows to his shoulder and back. He yelled out in panic, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" My mother, no longer sitting quietly, jumped to her feet. Her eyes blazed with anger as she threatened, "I'm calling the police to report that you came into my house and attacked my husband." At that, Grandma burst into a loud, confident laugh and shot back, "Go ahead, call the police. Worst case, I'll get fined. But they won't ignore the fact that you injured a 14-year-old girl." Her quick, sharp words turned the tables instantly. Simon rushed to stop my mother, snatching the phone from her hand and saying, "Enough, don't call the cops." As I stood there watching my grandmother fight for me, I realized something important. Some people, even if they're not with you every day, love and care for you in a priceless and genuine way. And because of that love, they're willing to face any danger, even risk their own life to protect you. At that moment, I felt fortunate to have my grandmother, Carol, a woman of courage and someone who loved me unconditionally. About 10 minutes later, when everyone had calmed down and the tension in the room had eased, Grandma Carol looked my mother straight in the eye and said in a firm, decisive voice, "I'm going to take Amanda in. Tomorrow morning, you and I are going to the Chicago family court together. I need you to give up your guardianship so I can officially raise her." The moment she said it, Simon and my mother exchanged glances. To my surprise, their faces lit up with clear relief and satisfaction. It was apparent they had probably wanted to get rid of me for a long time, and this was the golden opportunity they couldn't pass up. Without a second of hesitation or discussion, they nodded in quick agreement. My mother's readiness to give me up stung deeply, but it also made me realize something. I was no longer a priority in her life. A moment later, Grandma turned to me, her eyes soft and full of love. In a warm, steady voice, she said, "From today on, Amanda, you'll be living with me. I'll take care of you and ensure you have everything. I nodded immediately without hesitation because I knew I would still have genuine love and be seen as an essential family member with Grandma. After Grandma officially announced she would be taking me in, Simon's attitude shifted completely. He immediately got up, unlocked my bedroom door, and told me to start packing. With a strangely hurried expression, he suggested I gather only the most basic and important things first. He promised to help pack the rest of my belongings and bring them to Grandma's house the next day. I quickly gathered the essentials: a few sets of clothes, my school books, and a handful of keepsakes from my father that I treasured above all else. Every item I placed into the bag carried memories of a happier time, memories that now belonged only to the past. 20 minutes later, I stood in front of the house where I had lived all 14 years. I looked at the familiar walls, the small front garden, and the swing my father had built for me. My heart felt heavy with emotion. Then I climbed into Grandma's old car and we drove away from the place that would no longer be my home. As the car rolled forward, I glanced out the window and saw Simon, my mother, and Harper standing in the doorway. They didn't wave goodbye. They just stood there watching. In that moment, I knew my new life with Grandma was about to begin. In the car, as Grandma's old sedan rolled through the night, a wave of tangled emotions surged inside me. The streetlights flickered past the window, their shifting glow like old memories slowly fading into the distance. For a while, we sat in silence. Then I turned to look at Grandma, her focus steady on the road, and silently thanked her. I didn't need to say it out loud. She already understood the depth of my gratitude. She hadn't just pulled me out of a hopeless situation. She had given me a new home where I could feel loved and protected. As if she could sense my thoughts, Grandma gently rested her hand on my knee, her touch warm and reassuring. Her eyes carried that same unconditional love I had always known from her. She told me that life can be complex and unfair sometimes, but the important thing is never to give up. She reminded me that no matter how difficult things felt now, the future still awaited plenty of good opportunities. Real love, she said, never asks you to sacrifice your dignity or accept injustice. Her words soothed the raw ache in my heart. Finally, she promised me that from this day on, I would never have to face hardship alone again. With her here, I would always have someone to protect and love me without condition. That promise warmed my heart after a day that had left it bruised. We arrived at Grandma's house around 11 that night. She wasted no time preparing the bedroom I always used when I visited her on weekends. She changed the sheets, tidied up the wardrobe, and ensured everything in the room felt as clean and cozy as possible. That room had once been my father's when he was a boy. The pale blue walls, the old wooden desk, and the bookshelf still filled with adventure stories all remained exactly as they'd been. There was something comforting about sleeping in the space where my dad had once lived and grown up. I couldn't fall asleep that night, even lying in a soft bed in a warm room. My mind kept spinning with the day's events. It wasn't until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, when exhaustion finally overtook me, that I drifted off. But the sleep I found wasn't restful or peaceful. Instead, my dreams were flooded with old memories of my family, scenes from the happy days with both my parents. They came rushing back like a torrent, sweeping me into the past, into a time when love was whole and family still truly meant home. In my dream, the images of the past appeared as vivid as old film reels. I found myself in the best years of my life when I had a happy family. I had my father, Daniel, a police officer with a gentle smile. He loved me with all his heart, always making time to play with me after long, exhausting shifts. No matter how stressful or dangerous his job was, he became the best dad in the world when he came home. I had my mother, Rachel, a skilled secretary at a large law firm. Despite her busy schedule and strict deadlines, she always tried to be home in time to prepare a warm dinner for the family. Her talented hands could turn the simplest ingredients into meals that tasted incredible. I can still remember the precious moments from when I was little, the evenings when Dad held me in his strong arms and told me fascinating stories from his day at work, the nights when Mom sat beside my bed, her voice soft as she read me fairy tales about princes and princesses until I drifted to sleep. I remember our weekend trips to the zoo where we explored the animal kingdom together, laughing at the playful monkeys. I remember the long vacations at beautiful beaches where Dad and I built sandcastles while Mom and I collected seashells. I once had a family where love flowed through every moment, but all that happiness was shattered completely when I was 12. It was a cold October weekend in 2007. Around 10 at night, while we were watching a movie together, the landline suddenly rang loudly, as if warning us that something terrible was about to happen. After a short call, my mother broke down, sobbing in anguish. From that day on, I no longer had a father. He was gone forever, killed in a horrific accident on the interstate. The police concluded he had been driving under the influence. At first, no one in the family believed it. My father had never touched a drop of beer or liquor in his life. It wasn't until much later that I discovered the real reason he had decided to drink that night, hidden in the pages of a secret journal he had left behind. In the dark days after my father's death, my mother seemed to become an entirely different person. She spoke less, her smile rarely appeared, and sleepless nights became her new regular. I often found her sitting by the window, staring blankly outside or clutching old family photographs as silent tears streamed down her face. Back then, I believed she was so deeply in love with my father that she couldn't bear the enormity of losing him. For the first 3 months after my father passed away, Grandma Carol became the true pillar of our family. She often drove the 10 miles from her house to care for me and look after my mother. She cooked for us, helped me with my homework, and kept a close eye on my mother's mental state. She was afraid that, overcome with grief, my mother might do something irreversible. Even though Grandma was suffering just as much, mourning the death of her only son, she held back her pain to be the rock we could lean on. I would sometimes catch her quietly wiping away tears when she thought no one was looking, only to turn around and smile, offering comfort to me and my mother. A little over 3 months after my father's death, my mother slowly began returning to her old self. She started looking for a new job to rebuild our lives. She went to work regularly with a more positive outlook and often came home early to cook dinner for me, just like she used to. In those evenings, she told me stories again and showed interest in my schoolwork. With the genuine care and love she showed me during that time, I truly believed our future would be bright. I thought that as long as we stood by each other, we could overcome the pain of loss, and in time, life would return to how it had been. But life didn't allow that hope to become reality. Just 1 year after my father's death, another wave of family upheaval crashed into my life, as if fate had decided it was time to test me again. And from that storm, I finally learned who in my family would sacrifice everything for me. Exactly 1 year after my father's death, my mother began to change in ways I didn't understand at the time. She started seeing a man I had never met before. At first, she told me he was a friend from work, but it quickly became clear their relationship was far more than that. She began inviting him over on weekend evenings, cooking special dinners just for him. Sometimes he even stayed the night in the very bedroom where my mother and father once shared their happiest moments. To me, it felt deeply uncomfortable, almost like an insult to my father's memory. That man was Simon Thompson, my mother's direct supervisor at the law firm where she worked. He was a 42-year-old attorney, divorced for 2 years, with a daughter named Harper, who was 2 years younger than I. He dressed with the polished style of a man used to success. From the first time I met him, I had a poor impression. The way he looked at me with a cold, slightly contemptuous stare made my skin crawl. What infuriated me most was his obvious two-faced nature. When my mother was present, he acted as though he cared about me, asking polite questions about school and even offering to help with my homework. But the moment she left the room, his demeanor changed completely, revealing his true self through cold stares and cutting remarks. Worse still, there were times when he deliberately invented bad stories about me to tell my mother. He claimed I was disobedient, disrespectful to adults, and difficult to manage. His lies made her believe I was becoming a problem child who needed stricter discipline. At first, I tried to share my feelings and observations about Simon with my mother. I told her about his two-faced attitude and the lies he made up about me, but she dismissed everything I said almost immediately. She insisted I was being overly sensitive and that I was just jealous of having to share her love with someone else. After a few attempts, each ending with her refusing to listen and even scolding me for slandering Simon, I stopped telling her anything about him. I realized that in her eyes, Simon's words now carried more weight than mine ever could. Whenever Grandma Carol came to visit us, or when I went to stay with her on weekends, I would confide in her about my mother and Simon. In the anger and desperation of being 13, I once begged her, "Grandma, please help me break them up. Simon's not a good person." To my naive and unreasonable request, Grandma held me close with the understanding of someone who had lived long enough to know better. She spoke gently, but honestly. "I can't do that for you, sweetheart. Your father is gone, and your mother can look for love and happiness again. If you can't live peacefully with them, stay with me. I'll take care of you." Her words left me both sad and relieved. Sad because I couldn't change the situation, but comforted because I knew I still had someone who truly loved me and would always protect me. 3 months later, my mother officially married Simon in a small ceremony at City Hall. The quiet house that had once been just the two of us became crowded and noisy with 4 people under one roof. Harper, Simon's 12-year-old daughter, also moved in, taking the remaining bedroom in the house that her father had arranged for her. In my mind, the memories of that 1 year living with Simon and Harper returned like a haunting film reel. From the moment they officially moved in, the once peaceful home became a place where tension and conflict grew heavier with each passing day. The most noticeable change was in my mother. She was no longer the gentle, patient woman I had once known. Instead, she became irritable, quick to anger, and always took the side of her new family. Whenever a conflict arose, she defended Simon and Harper without listening to my side. The evenings she once spent talking with me disappeared entirely, replaced by private conversations with Simon behind their bedroom door. Simon had an exceptional talent for finding ways to pick fights with me. He seized on the most minor things to criticize, leaving dishes in the sink for too long, how I spoke to Harper, anything. Every day he found something new to complain about and report to my mother. And the worst part was, she believed every word he said without question. Harper quickly learned to imitate her father's behavior. She would provoke me, then run to him in tears whenever I reacted. Each time, Simon had another reason to scold me in front of my mother. And then in my dream, I saw tonight's events unfold again. The moment they all demanded I leave my bedroom, my mother's cold voice telling me to get out of the house if I didn't give up my room, Simon's grip on my wrist, so tight it left marks, and finally, the sight of them slamming my door shut, taking the key, and leaving me huddled in the hallway like a homeless person. In my sleep, I relived the full weight of the pain and despair of tonight, the feeling of being betrayed by my mother, the crushing loneliness of being cast aside in the very home my father had spent his life building. Those images kept looping in my head, spinning endlessly like a whirlpool of memories I couldn't escape. Grandma gently pulled open the curtains while I was still lost in those painful old memories. Warm morning light spilled into the room, and I realized it was already morning. The clock on the wall read 8:00 a.m. She looked at me with gentle eyes and said, "Get up, wash your face, and have breakfast, dear. We have to go to the family court. I arranged to meet your mother there at 9:00. Without arguing or asking questions, I did exactly as she said. I quickly washed my face and put on the neatest clothes I owned. Grandma had prepared a simple breakfast of buttered toast and a warm glass of milk, but I could only manage a few bites. My stomach knotted with anxiety about what was to come. Right at 9:00 a.m., we arrived at the Cook County Family Court in downtown Chicago. The tall, red brick building, with its massive front columns, made me feel small and uneasy. Grandma held my hand tightly as we walked inside. My mother and Simon were already sitting on hard plastic chairs in the waiting room. She was holding her pregnant belly and looked tired. When she saw us, she gave only a cold nod in greeting. The court process was quicker and simpler than I had imagined. A court clerk explained the guardianship transfer petition. My mother needed to sign Form FL 105 to officially give up her guardianship, while Grandma signed the petition to take my temporary guardianship. What left me frozen was how quickly my mother signed those essential papers. She didn't hesitate, didn't read them carefully, and didn't look at me even once. Her pen moved fast and decisively, as if she were signing a simple sales contract, not giving up her right to be my mother. Once the paperwork was complete, the judge officially recognized Grandma Carol as my legal guardian. Back at Grandma's house that afternoon, a swirl of emotions churned inside me. I hugged her tightly and whispered, "Thank you for everything. I don't know what I'd do without you." Gently stroking my hair, she replied, "I promised I would take care of you, and I'll keep that promise." At that moment, I knew that my life now had only one faithful family member, my grandmother. In the following years, I grew up surrounded by Grandma Carol's unconditional love and devoted care. Life with her was completely different from anything I had experienced before. Every morning, I woke to her gentle voice calling my name and the smell of pancakes drifting in from the kitchen. Every evening, she waited for me to come home to share dinner, and she would ask about my day at school. Financially, with 4 rental houses in her name, Grandma had enough to support me until I graduated from college without any hardship. Those 4 houses were the valuable assets my grandfather Robert had left her when he passed away in 2000. He had been a successful building contractor and purchased those properties in the 1980s when real estate in Chicago was still cheap. Grandma earned a steady, substantial sum of $6,000 in monthly rental income. Thanks to that income, her life was far less stressful. She didn't need to work a wage-paying job and could devote herself entirely to caring for and raising me. Still, knowing she was financially secure never made me wasteful or lazy. On the contrary, I always tried to live frugally and responsibly. I only bought what I truly needed, never asked for expensive items, and didn't chase the flashy lifestyle that many of my peers seemed to want. By the time I was 16, I had started working part-time on weekends and during summer breaks to earn extra spending money and help with living expenses. I worked as a morning newspaper delivery girl, a server at a local cafe, and later as a math tutor for kids in the neighborhood. I kept at it even though Grandma often told me I didn't need to work. She could provide everything I needed. I wanted to learn how to be independent and to understand the value of every dollar I earned. When I was 24, Grandma did something that completely surprised and moved me. She decided to sell one of her 4 most valuable rental houses for $380,000. Then she took all that money and her savings and bought a brand new 4-bedroom home in the western suburbs of Chicago as a gift for me. The new house was spacious with 2,200 square feet of living space, beautiful front and backyards, a 2-car garage, and a spot in a quiet, safe neighborhood with good schools nearby. This is the home we live in today. When I asked her why she would give me such a precious gift, she looked at me with loving eyes and explained, "You're 24 now. You need your own life. You should find a good husband, start a family, and have children." Her generosity and sacrifice deeply touched me. Selling one of her rental properties meant her monthly income would drop by $1,500, but I couldn't agree with living alone while leaving her by herself. I told her firmly, "I'll only accept this gift if you agree to live with me in the new house and let me take care of you." At first, she hesitated, worried that living with her might make it harder for me to find a partner. But in the end, because she wanted me to have the house, she agreed. And from that day until now, we've lived happily together in this home, where I can finally give back a little of the love she's given me all these years. As for my mother and Simon, after I left the house in 2009, their lives began sliding down a slope they could never recover from. Bits of news Grandma heard from our old neighbors painted a picture of a family drowning in trouble. By 2015, exactly 10 years ago, Grandma told me something that left me both shocked and oddly aware of fate's cruel sense of irony. They had been forced to sell the house, the very home my father had poured his heart into building, the same house they had thrown me out of, just to pay off crushing debts. From what Grandma learned, Simon had invested in a business venture and lost heavily. He opened his own law office but couldn't attract enough clients, and on top of that, he put money into the stock market at the worst possible time. Bank loans and credit card debt piled up, and interest rates climbed beyond their ability to pay. The bank issued multiple warnings and eventually threatened to repossess the house unless they paid the principal plus interest within 60 days. With no other choice, they listed the home for far less than its actual value to scrape together the cash they needed. That year, when Grandma told me the news, she asked me carefully, "Amanda, do you want me to buy back your old family home? I will pay if you want to keep it for your father's memory." But I refused without hesitation. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "That house is nothing but painful memories of Dad and my mother's betrayal. I don't want to live there and be reminded of all that every day." Hearing this, Grandma nodded, fully understanding. She agreed not to repurchase the house, letting it go along with all the painful memories it carried. From 2015 onward, I lost all contact with my mother and her new family. I had no idea where they moved, how they were doing financially, or even if they were alive and well. On the occasional sleepless night, I still found myself wondering if my mother ever regretted her decisions, if she ever thought about the daughter she had given up. As the years of silence passed, I believed the final chapter between my mother and me had closed for good. I was certain our paths would never cross again, and I had learned to live without her presence or love. But again, fate decided to play a cruel and unexpected trick on me. Just a week ago, she appeared at my doorstep in a state of desperation, forcing me to face the past I thought I had buried forever. And on that day, I made what may have been the most ruthless decision of my entire life. Last Sunday, a day that should have been as peaceful as any other, my life was thrown off balance. The doorbell rang around 2 o'clock in the afternoon while I was sitting with Grandma watching TV. I opened the door and froze when I saw my mother standing on the doorstep. She looked far older and more worn than she had 16 years ago. Her hair was now gray, her face lined with deep wrinkles, and crow's feet etched around her eyes. She wore a shabby old sweater, and it was clear she had been crying for a long time before coming here. Despite the resentment still heavy in my chest, I invited her inside. Grandma was in the kitchen then and hadn't seen her. Sitting on the couch, my mother's voice trembled as she explained her situation. The son she had with Simon, a boy named Marcus, was now 15 and battling late-stage leukemia. The treatment costs were staggering, and they needed $350,000 to take him to a specialized hospital in Houston. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she pleaded with me, "Amanda, please help me. I know I was wrong in the past, but Marcus is your brother. You can't let him die." I sat in silence for a moment, then looked her straight in the eye and said coldly, "Don't forget I'm your daughter too. Remember what you did to me 16 years ago, especially now that you need money." No sooner had I said that than Grandma walked out from the kitchen, holding an old photo album, her face flushed with anger. Without a word, she lunged forward, grabbed my mother by the hair, and dragged her toward the front yard. She shouted with venom in her voice, "You don't deserve to sit in Amanda's house." Her sudden outburst left me stunned. The last time I had seen her this furious was when she took a wooden stick to Simon. Without hesitation, I rushed after her. Out in the front yard, Grandma hurled the photo album down at my mother's feet. The pages flew open, spilling out snapshots of my family's happier days when my father was still alive. Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, and family picnics. The sight of those photos made my mother break down completely. She collapsed to her knees on the driveway, sobbing as she begged Grandma, "Carol, please help Marcus. I'll do anything to make it up to you." But Grandma refused without hesitation, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "You're the reason my son is dead. Get out of here, you worthless woman." Her words stunned me. The reason my father died? That question lodged itself in my mind like a blade. I turned to her quickly and asked, "Grandma, what do you mean? How could my mother be the reason Dad died?" Grandma let out a heavy sigh, her eyes filled with pain, and answered, "Back then, your mother had an affair with her boss. Your father found out. He was devastated. He drank himself into a stupor, got behind the wheel, and the accident happened." Her words hit me like a lightning strike. The world around me seemed to spin. I stammered, "Why are you only telling me this now?" She sighed again and went back into the house. 2 minutes later, she returned holding a worn, black leather notebook, my father's journal, which he had hidden in Grandma's storage shed. Whenever something important happened, he would come to her house and write it down. Grandma explained that she had only learned the truth a week ago. She had returned to the old house to clean and stumbled upon the journal tucked away in a sealed box. She opened it to an entry dated October 15th, 2007, just days before my father's death. In his familiar handwriting were the words, "Today I found out Rachel slept with that bastard boss of hers. My heart is broken. I don't know what to do with this marriage." Seeing my father's handwriting and reading his anguish left no doubt in my mind. Without hesitation, I grabbed my mother by the arm, pulled her to her feet, and shoved her out through the gate with all my strength. As I watched her walk away, a deep, burning hatred settled in my chest, and I swore to myself, for as long as I live, I will never forgive her. It's been a week since the day I pushed my mother out of my house, a week of long, sleepless nights and countless questions with no clear answers. And today is another special day, my grandmother Carol's 82nd birthday. I decided to tell this entire story to share it with you and remind myself never to forget all that she has sacrificed and done for me over these past 16 years. Grandma saved me from a family that no longer loved me, gave me a real home, and most importantly, taught me the meaning of unconditional love. Growing up with her gave me more than material stability. It shaped my character and the values I live by today. Through this story, I also want to say that sometimes life forces us onto painful paths. The people we trust most may betray us, but there will also be those willing to give up everything to protect us. What matters is learning to cherish those who genuinely love us. But before I end my story, I have a question that's haunted me for the past week. Was I too cruel to refuse to help Marcus, my half-brother? Am I letting the pain of the past blind my conscience and my humanity? Deep down, I still hate them for what happened 16 years ago. But all week, the image of Marcus, a 15-year-old boy fighting for his life, has haunted me. No matter what, he is still an innocent life. Please leave your honest advice in the comments below. I want to hear different perspectives to make the right decision. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it so that more people can hear it and reflect. Thank you for patiently following along with my long story.